The parched earth cracked under Jedediah's worn boots, each step raising a small plume of dust that mirrored the cloud hanging heavy in his chest. 10 years. 10 years since he'd last seen this forsaken landscape. 10 years since he'd willingly turned his back on Dust Creek and the life it offered, or rather, didn't offer. He'd heard about his mother's passing weeks ago, a terse telegram delivered to him in Abilene. Short, to the point, like Martha had always been. Come home. Arrangements pending. No emotion, no plea, just stark fact. He'd delayed as long as he dared, the ghosts of this place clinging to him like burrs. Dust Creek hadn't changed. A scattering of sun-baked buildings huddled around the dry creek bed, a testament to stubbornness more than prosperity. The saloon, the last chance, still stood, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. Even the vultures circling overhead seemed to have been waiting for him. The cemetery was a patch of uneven ground on the outskirts of town, marked by weathered wooden crosses and sun-bleached stones. Martha's grave was fresh, a raw wound in the already scarred earth. A simple wooden cross bore her name, and beneath it, the words "Beloved Mother." Jedediah hadn't realized how much those words would sting. He knelt, the dust settling on his dark trousers. He hadn't brought flowers, hadn't thought to. He hadn't known what to say, what to feel. Guilt, sharp and bitter, was the only thing that felt real. Had left her here, alone, to scratch out a living in this desolate place. Had chased dreams of gold and glory, while she'd been left to face the dust and the hardship. A shadow fell over him. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the harsh sun. Sarah, the baker's daughter, stood there, her face etched with a mixture of pity and resentment. He remembered her as a child, all pigtails and shy smiles. Now she was a woman, hardened by the same unforgiving landscape that had claimed his mother. "Jedediah," she said, her voice flat. "Welcome home." Sarah's words hung in the air, heavier than the dust. Jedediah rose slowly, his joints protesting the years of hard riding and harder living. He brushed the dirt from his trousers, avoiding her gaze. "Sarah," he acknowledged, his voice rough from disuse. "Heard about your mother. Sorry for your loss." The words felt hollow, inadequate. He knew loss. Dust Creek was built on it. She nodded curtly, her eyes fixed on the fresh grave. "She spoke of you often. Hoped you'd come back." Guilt twisted deeper. He hadn't deserved her hope. "I should have," he began, but the words died in his throat. What could he have done? Change the wind? Stop the drought? Sarah cut him off. "It doesn't matter now." She turned and walked back towards town, her shoulders squared against the sun. "The reading of the will is tomorrow. Courthouse, 10 o'clock. Jedediah watched her go, the unspoken accusation stinging more than any shouted words. He spent the night in the abandoned family cabin, the silence broken only by the creaking of the wind and the scurrying of unseen creatures. Memories long suppressed surfaced in the darkness: his father's calloused hands, his mother's weary smile, the endless cycle of planting and praying for rain. The next morning, the Dust Creek courthouse was packed. Mostly women, their faces etched still with the same weariness he'd seen on Sarah's. He recognized a few widows, mostly, their children clinging to their skirts like burrs. He stood at the back, a silent observer. The lawyer, a thin, nervous man in a too-tight suit, cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Martha Beale." The will was simple, stark. The cabin, the small plot of land, everything went to Jedediah. He felt a wave of nausea. Worthless. All of it. Years of his mother's life, reduced to this. Then the lawyer spoke again, his voice taking on a hesitant tone. There is a codicil, added recently. He adjusted his spectacles, avoiding eye contact. It stipulates that should Jedediah Beale not return to Dust Creek within 10 years of her passing, the property is to be sold at auction. The proceeds to be divided amongst the fatherless children of this town. A murmur rippled through the room. Jedediah felt a cold hand grip his heart. He understood then. Martha hadn't left him anything. She'd given him a choice. A chance to finally do something worthwhile. As the lawyer droned on about legalities, Jedediah noticed Sheriff Corbin standing near the door, his gaze fixed on him. Corbin was a large man, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. Jedediah had heard whispers about Corbin, rumors of corruption and favoritism, of deals made in the shadows. And he noticed something else, a subtle undercurrent of fear in the eyes of the women in the room when Corbin's gaze lingered on them. He also noticed a lot of fatherless children. A lot. More than any drought or fever could account for. Jedediah barely registered the lawyer's closing remarks. His mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of his mother's life. The sacrifices had been too blind to see. The auction was set for the following week. A week to decide. A week to either walk away, richer in land but poorer in spirit, or to finally plant roots in the dust he'd tried so hard to escape. He slipped out of the courthouse unnoticed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He needed to be alone, to think. He walked back to the abandoned cabin, the sun beating down on his back. The place was a mess, years of neglect evident in the peeling wallpaper, the sagging roof, the dust-choked air. As he began to clear out some of the debris, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard. He knelt, pulling it up. Beneath it, nestled in a shallow hollow, was a small wooden box. His heart quickened. He lifted the box, its hinges creaking with age. Inside, tied with a faded ribbon, were letters. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately, the elegant script a stark contrast to the harshness of her life. He untied the ribbon, his fingers trembling slightly. The letters were addressed to her, postmarked from various towns and cities he'd never heard of. He unfolded the first one, the paper brittle and yellowed. The words swam before his eyes. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly, but it spoke of a deep affection, a shared history, a promise that had been broken. The writer, a man named Elijah, wrote of his regrets, his inability to leave his wife, his enduring love for Martha. Jedediah read on, his breath catching in his throat. Each letter revealed a little more, painting a picture of a woman he barely knew. A woman who had loved and lost, who had carried a secret burden for years. And then, in the last letter, a bombshell. I know I will never be the father he deserves, but please know, Martha, that Jedediah carries my blood. He is a Beale in name only. He is my son, and I will always watch over him from afar. The letter slipped from Jedediah's grasp, fluttering to the dusty floor. He stared at the words, his mind reeling. Elijah, not Beale. He wasn't a Beale. He was something else. A wave of dizziness washed over him. His whole life built on a foundation of lies. He picked up the letter again, rereading the words, searching for a loophole, a denial, anything to contradict the stark truth. But there was nothing. Only the undeniable fact that the man he'd known as his father wasn't his father at all. He looked around the cabin, at the familiar surroundings that suddenly felt alien. Who was he? Where did he belong? Dust Creek suddenly seemed even more foreign, more hostile. He wasn't a Beale. He was an outsider, just like he'd always felt. He had always been a little different from his peers, a little more restless, a little more drawn to the horizon. Had always attributed that to wanderlust, to a yearning for something more. Now, he realized, it was in his blood. That night, Jedediah found himself at the Last Chance Saloon. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. The piano player hammering out a tune that did little to soothe the turmoil in his gut. Head down 3 whiskeys fast, the burn barely registering. He needed to see Corbin. Needed to understand. He spotted the sheriff at a corner table, surrounded by a couple of his deputies, and a man Jedediah didn't recognize, dressed in a suit that looked too expensive for Dust Creek. They were laughing, their voices loud and boisterous. The fear in the women's eyes at the courthouse flashed back to him. Jedediah walked over, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. The music seemed to fade, the noise of the saloon dimming as he approached. He stopped at the edge of the table, his shadow folding across Corbin's face. "Corbin," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The laughter died. Corbin looked up, his eyes narrowing. He recognized Jedediah. "Beale," he drawled, a hint of warning in his voice. "What can I do for you?" "I want to talk to you," Jedediah said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm busy," Corbin replied, gesturing to his companions. "Come back later." "This can't wait," Jedediah pressed, his hand instinctively moving towards the knife sheathed at his hip. Corbin's eyes flicked to Jedediah's hand. "Whatever it is, it can wait. Now, unless you want to spend the night in my jail, I suggest you move along." The stranger in the suit chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on Jedediah's nerves. "Maybe he needs a little persuasion, Sheriff." That was it. Something snapped inside Jedediah. He grabbed Corbin by the front of his shirt, holding him out of his chair. The chair crashed to the floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent saloon. "I know what you're doing, Corbin," Jedediah snarled, his face inches from the sheriff's. "I know about the arrangements you make with these women. About the fathers who mysteriously disappear." Corbin's face darkened. He shoved Jedediah back, his deputies instantly rising to their feet. "You're drunk, Beale, and you're making a fool of yourself." "Am I?" Jedediah countered, his voice rising. "Or am I speaking the truth? Are you afraid the truth will come out, Corbin? Afraid everyone will see you for the snake you are?" Corbin swung, a clumsy telegraphed punch that Jedediah easily dodged. He retaliated with a swift jab to Corbin's jaw, sending the sheriff staggering back. The brawl erupted. The saloon exploded in chaos. Punches were thrown, tables overturned, glasses shattered. Jedediah fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed, fueled by whiskey, anger, and the sudden, shocking revelation of his own identity. He took a blow to the head, saw stars, but kept fighting. He saw one of Corbin's deputies reach for his gun and swiftly kick the table into him, sending him sprawling. Corbin, recovering, charged at Jedediah, swinging a heavy wooden chair. Jedediah ducked, the chair smashing against the bar, splintering the wood. He grabbed a broken bottle from the floor, the jagged glass glinting in the dim light. The fight was brutal, bloody, and far from over. Jedediah felt the sharp sting of glass across his forearm. He stumbled back, clutching the wound, the broken bottle falling from his numb fingers. Corbin, breathing heavily, advanced, a cruel smile twisting his lips. The deputies were struggling to regain their footing. The stranger in the suit had disappeared. Just as Corbin lunged, a voice cut through the chaos. "Enough! Sarah." She stood near the entrance, her face pale but resolute. She held a shotgun, its twin barrels pointed directly at Corbin. The saloon fell silent again, all eyes on her. Corbin hesitated, his eyes flicking from Sarah to the shotgun and back again. He knew she wouldn't hesitate. Martha Beale's daughter had grit. "Put that down, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "You don't want to do something you'll regret." "I regret a lot of things, Sheriff," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't one of them. You and your arrangements are done here. Get out." Corbin glared at her, his face a mask of fury. But he knew he was beaten, for now. He spat on the floor near Jedediah's feet. "This isn't over, Beale," he growled. "Not by a long shot." He turned and stalked out of the saloon, his deputies trailing behind him. The tension in the room slowly eased. Sarah lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at Jedediah, his face bruised and bloody, his arm bleeding. "You need a doctor," she said softly. Jedediah shook his head. "No doctors in Dust Creek ID Trust. Besides, can't afford one." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes filled with concern. "Come with me. With me. I know a thing or two about patching people up." He hesitated, distrust warring with a strange sense of something else. Hope, maybe? He hadn't felt hope in a long time. He finally nodded. Sarah led him out of the saloon, the curious gazes of the patrons following them. She took him to her small house on the edge of town, a simple structure but clean and well cared for. She gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table. She set about cleaning his wounds, her touch surprisingly gentle. She soaked a cloth in warm water and carefully dabbed at the cuts and bruises on his face. He winced, but didn't pull away. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said, her voice low. "Corbin's a dangerous man." "Someone had to," Jedediah replied, his gaze fixed on her hands as she worked. "He's preying on these women." Sarah sighed. "I know. My mother, she helped some of them when she could." He looked up, surprised. "She did?" Sarah nodded. She saw a lot of suffering in this town. She tried to ease it, in her own way. She finished cleaning his face and began to examine the gash on his arm. He watched her, his mind racing. He was Elijah's son. Corbin was corrupt. And Martha Beale, the woman Head thought he knew, had been a secret guardian angel. Dust Creek was peeling back its layers, revealing a history Head never suspected. As she stitched the wound on his arm, a sharp, burning pain shot through him. He clenched his jaw, trying not to cry out. "Hold still," Sarah murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Almost done." Her fingers brushed against his skin, a fleeting touch that sent a strange shiver through him. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, he saw the weariness in her eyes, the lines etched on her face from hardship and loss. But he also saw strength, resilience, and a quiet determination that mirrored something within himself. He stayed silent as she finished stitching the wound, tying off the thread with a practiced knot. She cleaned up the blood and bandages, then met his gaze. "There," she said, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Good as new." "Almost." He nodded, unable to find the words to express his gratitude. He stood up, feeling a little steadier, a little less lost. "Thank you, Sarah," he managed to say. "For everything." She nodded back, her eyes searching his. "Be careful, Jedediah. Corbin won't let this go." He knew she was right, but he also knew he couldn't back down. Not anymore. He had to do something. But what? He had no money, no influence, and a sheriff who wanted him dead. He found himself the next morning drawn to the edge of town, to the small, neglected cemetery, perched on a dusty hill overlooking Dust Creek. It was a place of quiet sorrow, the final resting place for those who hadn't made it in this harsh land. Jedediah hadn't visited in years, not since his mother's burial. He wasn't one for sentiment, but something compelled him now. He walked among the weathered headstones, the names and dates barely legible. Most were simple markers, carved from rough-hewn stone. As he wandered deeper, he noticed something peculiar. A cluster of graves, all belonging to women, and all of them had died young. He stopped at one, the name Eliza May Bartlett etched into the stone. She had died at the age of 22. The next grave belonged to Mary Sue Higgins, dead at 19. And then Rebecca Ann Johnson, gone at 25. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the proximity of the graves or the youth of the deceased. It was something else, something unspoken, a sense of wrongness that hung heavy in the air. He knelt down, brushing the dust from Eliza May Bartlett's headstone. 22 years old. What had taken her? He moved to the next grave, Mary Sue Higgins. The same question gnawed at him. Disease? Accident? Or something more sinister? He scanned the surrounding area, his eyes narrowed. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. But beneath the surface, he sensed a darkness, a hidden truth. He remembered Sarah's words, Corbin and his arrangements. The fathers who mysteriously disappeared. Could these women have been victims of those arrangements too? Could Corbin be responsible for their deaths? The thought was sickening. He stood up, his fists clenched. He couldn't prove anything. Not yet. But he had a feeling, a gut instinct that told him something was terribly wrong. And he wouldn't rest until he found out the truth. He left the cemetery. The image of those young women's graves burned into his mind. He had a new purpose now, a new reason to fight. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was fighting for them. Jedediah knew he couldn't stay in Dust Creek. Not while Corbin still wore the badge. He needed answers, and he wouldn't find them staring down the barrel of a shotgun. He needed to dig. He packed light, a bedroll, some jerky, a canteen. He left Sarah a note, tucked under a loose stone by her door. Gone to find some answers. Be back. He didn't say when. He didn't know when. He rode out at dawn, heading north. He wasn't sure where he was going, exactly. But he knew he needed to find someone, anyone, who had left Dust Creek with a story to tell. Someone who'd seen what Corbin was capable of. He rode for days, the landscape blurring into a tapestry of sun-baked earth and scrub brush. He slept under the stars, the vast emptiness of the west, a stark reminder of how small he was, how insignificant his quest might seem. But he pressed on, driven by the faces of those young women in the cemetery, by the memory of Sarah's weary eyes. His first lead came in a dusty trading post near the border of Indian Territory. An old-timer, chewing tobacco and whittling wood, remembered Dust Creek. "Hard place," he rasped, spitting a stream of brown juice. "Hard men." Jedediah showed him the names from the headstones. Eliza May Bartlett, Mary Sue Higgins, Rebecca Ann Johnson, Peter Yuzan, Rebil Momotordoya. The old-timer squinted, his eyes clouded with age. He shook his head. "Don't recognize the names. Been a lot of folks come and go through Dust Creek. Most don't stay long. But then a flicker of recognition. Way Higgins, Mary Sue. Wasn't she sweet on that fella, Caleb? Caleb Miller?" Jedediah's ears perked up. "What happened to him?" The old-timer shrugged. "Vanished. One day he was there, courting Mary Sue. Next day, gone. Said he went to find work in Abilene. Never heard from him again. Abilene. It was a start." Jedediah thanked the old-timer, bought some supplies, and pointed his horse east. Abilene was a long ride, but it was the only thread he had. Days later, he found himself in Abilene, a bustling cattle town teeming with cowboys, gamblers, and hustlers. He started asking around, showing people the names. Caleb Miller. Had anyone seen him? Most shook their heads. Abilene was a transient town. Faces came and went like the wind. But then, in a dimly lit saloon, a bartender paused, wiping down the counter with a rag. "Miller. Yeah, I remember a Miller. Came through here a few years back. Quiet fella. Worked on a ranch south of town." Hope surged through Jedediah. "You know where that ranch is?" The bartender nodded. "Used to. It's abandoned now. The owner died. Ranch fell apart. But it's still there, just south of the river." Jedediah left the saloon, a renewed sense of purpose hardening his gaze. He had a ranch to find. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find Caleb Miller's ghost waiting there. Or something else entirely. Something that would finally expose Corbin for the snake he was. The ranch was a skeleton against the dying sun. Wind whistled through broken windows, and the corral sagged like a tired jaw. Jedediah dismounted, the silence heavy with the ghosts of forgotten dreams. He found the bunkhouse, its door hanging off one hinge. Inside, dust lay thick on the cots, and rats scurried at his approach. Nothing. He searched the main house, each room a hollow echo of what it once was. A child's drawing on the wall, faded and torn. A woman's comb, lying beside a cracked mirror. Fragments of lives, abruptly abandoned. He found nothing of Caleb Miller. As he turned to leave, a glint of metal caught his eye. A small, tarnished box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He pried it open. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. He recognized the handwriting on the envelopes, Mary Sue Higgins. He untied the ribbon, his fingers trembling. The letters were filled with longing, with whispered promises of a future that would never be. They painted a picture of a young couple deeply in love, their dreams as vast as the prairie sky. But the last letter, dated just weeks before Caleb's disappearance, was different. It was filled with fear. "Caleb, I'm scared. Things aren't right in Dust Creek. Martha Beale warned me. She said Corbin's got his hooks in everything. Said to be careful." Jedediah's blood ran cold. Martha Beale's name again. She had known. She had tried to warn them. He's been asking about you, Caleb. About your claim. Please, be careful. Don't trust anyone. The letter ended abruptly, unfinished. A dark premonition hanging in the air. As Jedediah finished reading, a twig snapped behind him. He whirled around, hand instinctively reaching for his coat. But he was too late. A rifle butt slammed into the back of his head, sending him crashing to the floor. Darkness consumed him. He awoke to the taste of blood and dust. His head throbbed, and his vision swam. He was tied to a gnarled mesquite tree, the rough bark digging into his skin. Corbin stood before him, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Didn't think you'd get this far, Beale," Corbin drawled, his voice laced with menace. "But you're persistent. I'll give you that." Jedediah spat on the ground. "What did you do to Caleb?" Corbin chuckled. "Caleb? He got greedy. Thought he could outsmart me. He learned his lesson. And Mary Sue." Jedediah's voice was a low growl. Corbin shrugged. "Collateral damage. Happens all the time." Two of Corbin's deputies stepped forward, their faces grim. Jedediah knew what was coming. He was too close to the truth. Corbin couldn't afford to let him live. "Any last words, Beale?" Corbin asked, his eyes glinting with sadistic pleasure. Jedediah looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "Dust Creek will remember you, Corbin. They'll know what you did." Corbin laughed. "Dust Creek forgets. They always do." He nodded to his deputies. As one of the deputies raised his rifle, Jedediah closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But then, a sound cut through the air. A sharp crack, followed by a scream. Jedediah opened his eyes again. Confusion warred with the throbbing in his skull. Corbin was gone. His deputies were sprawled on the ground, lifeless. Standing over them, rifle smoking, was a figure he barely recognized: old Silas, the town drunk from Dust Creek. Silas was swaying, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the last few minutes. He dropped the rifle, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. "Silas." What? Jedediah croaked, his throat raw. Silas shuffled closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. "He was gonna kill you, Jedediah. Couldn't let that happen. Not again." "Again? What are you talking about?" Jedediah strained against his bonds, trying to understand. Silas knelt beside him, fumbling with the ropes. I should have spoken up a long time ago, but I was scared. He had a hold on everyone. He finally managed to loosen the knots. Jedediah pulled free, rubbing his wrists. "Corbin," Silas wheezed, clutching his chest. "He's been doing this for years. Those women, Eliza May, Mary Sue, Rebecca, they weren't the first. And they wouldn't have been the last." Jedediah helped Silas lean against the tree. "What happened to them, Silas? Tell me the truth." Silas coughed, a rattling sound deep in his lungs. "Corbin," he saw opportunity. "Widows, orphans, women alone. He'd offer them protection. Alone. Anything to get them in his debt. Then, when they couldn't pay, he'd arrange things. Marriages to his cronies, deals with ranchers, anything to line his pockets. And if they refused?" Jedediah asked, his voice dangerously low. Silas' eyes welled up. "They disappeared." Accidents, illnesses, always something convenient. He controlled the doctor, the undertaker, everything. And those fathers, the ones who vanished, they got too close, asked too many questions. He gasped for air. Mary Sue, she was going to run away with Caleb. Corbin found out. Caleb ended up in a shallow grave. Mary Sue, she was found drowned in the creek. Said it was an accident. But I saw Corbin that night. I saw him dragging something heavy near the water. Silas closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. I knew. I always knew. But I was too afraid to speak. I'm a coward. Jedediah. A damn coward. Jedediah gripped Silas' shoulder. You're not a coward, Silas. You're here now. You're telling the truth. That's all that matters. Silas coughed again, blood flecking his lips. It's too late for me, Jedediah. But it's not too late for Dust Creek. You have to stop him. You have to make him pay. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper. Take this. It's a list. Names, dates, amounts owed. It's all there. Proof. He pressed the paper into Jedediah's hand. Silas took one last, shuddering breath. His eyes fluttered closed, and his body went limp. Jedediah held him for a moment, then gently laid him on the ground. Silas was gone, but his words, his confession, were a weapon that would finally bring Corbin down. Jedediah looked at the list in his hand. He had the evidence. Now, he just needed to deliver. Jedediah stared at the list in his hand. Names swam before his eyes: widows, farmers, shopkeepers. Each entry a testament to Corbin's greed, a brand seared into the flesh of Dust Creek. Silas' sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. He buried Silas near the abandoned ranch, a simple mound of earth marked with a weathered piece of wood. No preacher, no ceremony. Just a silent promise whispered on the wind. He took Silas' rifle. The ride back to Dust Creek felt different. The sun seemed to glare with a new intensity. The wind carried a scent of coming storm. He wasn't just Jedediah Beale anymore. He was an instrument of reckoning. He bypassed the main street, circling around to the outskirts of town. He needed to see Sarah first, make sure she was safe. He found her tending her garden, her face etched with worry. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jedediah, you're back. Her voice was barely a whisper. He dismounted, his gaze searching hers. I'm back, Dogdai, and I know everything. He told her about Caleb, about Mary Sue, about Silas' confession. He showed her the list. Her face paled as she read the names, recognizing many of them. He's been doing this for years, she breathed, her voice trembling. And nobody ever said a word. They will now, Jedediah said, his voice hard. I need your help, Sarah. I need you to talk to the others. Tell them what I've learned. Show them the list. Tell them it's time to stand up. Sarah nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. I will. Don't say Nichunai. But be careful, Jedediah. He'll be expecting you. Let him, Jedediah said, a grim smile playing on his lips. I've got a few surprises for him too. He spent the rest of the day moving through the shadows, talking to those he trusted. Martha Beale, the old woman who had tried to warn Mary Sue. Thomas, the blacksmith, whose son had mysteriously died after owing Corbin money. Each conversation a spark, igniting a slow-burning fire of anger and resentment. Fear still lingered in their eyes, but there was something else there, too, a glimmer of hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, things could finally change. He met them that night, under the cover of darkness, in the abandoned livery stable. A dozen souls, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single lantern. Farmers, shopkeepers, widows, each one carrying a burden of grief and injustice. Jedediah laid out the evidence Silas list, the letters from Mary Sue, the stories of vanished fathers and untimely deaths. He spoke with a quiet intensity, his words cutting through the years of fear and silence. "Corbin has held this town hostage for too long," he said, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Has taken our lives, our livelihoods, our loved ones. But it's time to take back what's ours. It's time to bring him to justice." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some were hesitant, their faces etched with doubt. Others were eager, their eyes burning with righteous anger. "What do you want us to do?" Thomas, the blacksmith, asked, his voice gruff. Jedediah looked at him, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to be ready. I want you to be willing to stand up and fight for what's right. Because tomorrow, we're going to take back Dust Creek." The air in the livery stable hung thick with anticipation. Jedediah knew Corbin wouldn't wait. Had smelled a shift in the wind, sensed the rebellion brewing. Dawn would be too late. "Hell come," Jedediah said, breaking the silence. "He won't let this fester. Hell try to crush it before it spreads." He divided them into groups, assigning tasks. Some to block the roads leading into town, others to watch Corbin's known associates. Thomas would fortify the blacksmith shop, turning it into a makeshift stronghold. Sarah would tend to the wounded, if it came to that. He kept Silas' rifle for himself. The wait was agonizing. Every creak of the stable, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He pictured Corbin, his face contorted with rage, plotting his next move. Then, the sound they'd been dreading, the unmistakable thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth. "He's here," someone whispered. Jedediah moved to the doorway, peering into the darkness. Corbin and his men, a dozen strong, were riding down Main Street, their faces grim, rifles held ready. They stopped in front of the saloon, Corbin dismounting, his eyes scanning the darkened buildings. "Beal," Corbin bellowed, his voice echoing through the stillness. "Come out, Beal. I know you're hiding, you and your little band of traitors." Jedediah stepped out of the stable, into the moonlight. He stood alone, a solitary figure facing down the forces of corruption. "I'm here, Corbin," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." Corbin laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Over? It's just beginning, Beal. You think you can stand against me? You think these pathetic farmers and widows can stop me?" "They're not afraid anymore, Corbin," Jedediah said. "They know the truth. They know what you've done." Corbin's face darkened. "Lies. All lies. You're trying to turn them against me, but they won't listen. They know who's in charge here. They know you're a thief, a liar, and a murderer," Jedediah said, his voice rising. "They know you killed Caleb Miller. They know you killed Mary Sue Higgins. They know you've been preying on the weak and vulnerable for years." He pulled out Silas' list, holding it up for all to see. "Here is the proof, Corbin Doe. The names, the dates, the amounts you stole. It's all here. And everyone in Dust Creek is going to know about it." Corbin's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching towards his gun. "You shouldn't have done that, Bill," he snarled. "You've made a big mistake." He drew his revolver, the metallic click echoing in the silence. Jedediah raised Silas' rifle, leveling it at Corbin's chest. "It's over, Corbin," Jedediah repeated. "Drop your gun." For a long moment, they stood locked in a silent standoff, the fate of Dust Creek hanging in the balance. The townsfolk watched from the shadows, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then Corbin smiled, a cruel, mirthless smile. "You think you can kill me, Bill? You think you have the guts?" He cocked his revolver. "Let's find out." Corbin fired. The bullet whizzed past Jedediah's ear, kicking up dust behind him. Jedediah didn't flinch. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked in his hands, the sound deafening. Corbin staggered, clutching his chest. He looked down, his fingers coming away stained crimson. His men reacted instantly, drawing their guns and opening fire. Jedediah dove for cover behind the stable, the air around him filled with the whine of bullets. But Corbin's men weren't just facing Jedediah. From the darkened windows of the saloon, the blacksmith shop, and the general store, townsfolk emerged, armed with rifles, shotguns, and whatever they could find. Martha Beale, her face grim, fired a shotgun from the window of her house, scattering Corbin's men. Thomas, the blacksmith, stood behind a barricade of overturned wagons, his hammer replaced by a rifle. Sarah, armed with a pistol, moved among the wounded, offering comfort and tending to their injuries. The fight was chaotic, brutal, and desperate. Bullets flew, men screamed, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Corbin's men, caught off guard by the unexpected resistance, fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Corbin, still bleeding, tried to rally his men, but his voice was weak, his authority diminished. He looked around, his eyes filled with disbelief and rage. The town he had controlled for so long was rising up against him. He saw Jedediah emerge from behind the stable, Silas' rifle still in his hands. He raised his revolver, aiming for Jedediah's head. But before he could fire, a figure stepped in front of Jedediah Sarah. She raised her pistol and fired. The bullet struck Corbin in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled, dropping his revolver. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with hatred. "You bitch," he snarled. Sarah didn't flinch. "It's over, Corbin," she said, her voice steady. "You can't hurt anyone anymore." Corbin collapsed to his knees, defeated. His men, seeing their leader fall, began to lose heart. One by one they dropped their weapons, surrendering to the townspeople. The shooting stopped. A tense silence fell over Dust Creek, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The townsfolk emerged from their hiding places, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They had won. They had finally taken back their town. The silence stretched, thick with the aftermath of violence. Corbin lay still in the dirt, his reign of terror finally ended. His men, disarmed and subdued, were huddled together, awaiting their fate. The townsfolk, bruised and weary, stared at them with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Sarah knelt beside Jedediah, examining a shallow gash on his arm. "You all right?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. He nodded, wincing slightly. "Just a scratch." "I'm fine," she said, but her eyes betrayed the lingering shock. She had shot a man, something she never thought she was capable of. The next few days were a blur of activity. The dead were buried, the wounded tended to. Corbin's assets, what little remained after years of his greed, were seized and redistributed among those he had wronged. The question of what to do with Corbin's men hung heavy in the air. Some wanted to hang them all, a swift and brutal justice. Others argued for a fair trial, however unlikely that seemed in Dust Creek. Jedediah listened to the arguments, his face impassive. He knew that whatever decision they made would set the tone for the future of the town. Revenge or justice? He remembered Silas' words, his dying plea for a better Dust Creek. Finally, he spoke. "Well, take them to the authorities in redemption," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let them stand trial. Let the law decide their fate." There were grumbles of dissent, but no one challenged him. They knew he was right. They couldn't become the monsters they had fought against. With Corbin gone, a new problem emerged: the need for a new sheriff. Someone to maintain order, to enforce the law, to protect the town from future threats. All eyes turned to Jedediah. He resisted. He wasn't a lawman. He was a rancher, a loner. He had no desire to wear a badge, to be confined by rules and regulations. But Sarah pleaded with him. "You're the only one they trust, Jedediah. You're the only one who can hold this town together." He looked at her, a face earnest and hopeful. He saw the fear in her eyes, the lingering trauma of Corbin's reign. He saw the fragile hope that had begun to bloom in Dust Creek, a hope he had helped to ignite. He thought of Silas, of Mary Sue, of all the lives Corbin had destroyed. He thought of the promise he had made, whispered on the wind, to bring justice to Dust Creek. He sighed. "All right," he said, his voice resigned. "I'll do it. But only until we can find someone else." A collective sigh of relief swept through the town. They had a sheriff. A reluctant one, perhaps, but one they trusted. One who had proven he was willing to stand up for what was right, even at great personal cost. Jedediah knew that the hard work was just beginning. Rebuilding trust, healing wounds, and creating a new Dust Creek, one founded on justice and fairness, would be a long and difficult road. But he was willing to walk it. For Sarah, for Silas, for the future of the town. The days that followed were a haze of paperwork, makeshift court sessions held in the saloon, and the constant, wearying presence of responsibility. Jedediah found himself staring out at the endless plains more than once. The urge to ride, to disappear, a constant pull. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, Sarah found him on the porch of the general store, staring west. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and dust. "Long day?" she asked, settling beside him on the wooden planks. He grunted, non-committal. Had been avoiding her, truth be told. Not out of malice, but from a fear he couldn't quite name. He knew she'd seen him at his worst, his most vulnerable. He wasn't used to being seen. "They're starting to call you sheriff," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Suits you?" He didn't reply. He wasn't sure anything suited him anymore. She shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed. "Jedediah," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something you should know. Something I haven't told anyone." He turned his head, his gaze questioning. "Caleb Miller," she hesitated, the name heavy on her tongue. "He wasn't just a neighbor. He was my brother. The air hung still, the revelation, a quiet explosion. Jedediah felt a jolt, not of surprise, but of understanding. The grief in her eyes, the fierce determination, suddenly made sense. I knew Corbin was behind it. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. Everyone did, but no one dared to speak up. They were too afraid. Tears welled in her eyes, tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. I was afraid too, until you came. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers. His touch was rough, but gentle. "I'm sorry, Zara," he said, the words gruff, inadequate. He knew no words could truly ease her pain. She squeezed his hand, her gaze meeting his. "Thank you, Jedediah, for giving me the courage to finally speak his name, for giving this town a chance." He looked into her eyes, saw the shared burden of loss, the burning desire for justice that mirrored his own. He understood then, the fear he'd been trying to avoid. It wasn't fear of being seen, but fear of connection. He was no longer alone in this fight. He had an ally, a partner, someone who understood the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of Dust Creek. The setting sun cast long shadows across the porch, painting the scene in hues of orange and purple. In the silence, they sat together, two souls bound by loss, and a shared determination to rebuild a broken town. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but they would face it together. The weight of Dust Creek didn't feel quite so heavy now. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the darkness that still clung to the edges of Dust Creek. Jedediah stood on Main Street, the newly appointed and deeply reluctant, sheriff's badge glinting dully in the sunlight. He was dressed in his usual worn denims and faded shirt, the rifle Silas had bequeathed him resting easy against his hip. He looked more like a rancher than a lawman, and that was precisely how he felt. He watched as the townsfolk began to stir, cautiously emerging from their homes. There was a new lightness in their steps, a tentative hope in their eyes. They greeted him with nods and shy smiles, a silent acknowledgement of the change that had swept through their town. Martha Beale, her face still etched with the memory of the fight, approached him. "Morning, Jedediah," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Heard you're wearing the star now." He touched the badge self-consciously. "Just till we find someone better." She chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Don't be so quick to dismiss yourself. You're exactly what this town needs." He didn't argue. He knew she was right, at least for now. But the thought of a future chained to Dust Creek, bound by its endless needs, still chafed. He spent the morning dealing with the aftermath of Corbin's reign, sorting through the confiscated goods, trying to unravel the tangled web of debts and injustices. It was tedious, frustrating work, but he knew it was necessary. Dust Creek couldn't move forward until the past was properly buried. As the sun climbed higher, he found Sarah outside the general store, tending to a small patch of wildflowers she had planted near the porch. The vibrant colors of the blossoms stood out against the dusty brown of the street, a small splash of beauty in a town starved for it. He approached her cautiously, still unsure of how to navigate the new intimacy between them. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Better," she said, a faint smile gracing her lips. "The flowers help." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes it was the small things that offered the greatest solace. "I was thinking," she continued, "about Caleb's land." It's been lying fallow for too long. I want to plant wheat. Something to give back to the town." Jedediah was silent for a moment, considering her words. It was a bold move, a declaration of hope in a place that had known only despair. "It'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "Well, get that land plowed and seeded. Together." Her smile widened, reaching her eyes. "Thank you, Jedediah. That means more than you know." As they stood there, bathed in the warm sunlight, Jedediah felt a shift within him. The weight of Dust Creek didn't seem so heavy anymore. He still yearned for the open range, for the freedom of the solitary life. But he also knew that he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while there was still work to be done, while there was still a chance to build something better, something lasting, out of the ashes of the past. Had give Dust Creek